Yeah, I believe so. And he talks about all sorts of the devastating effect that colonialism has had on those countries. That's why they're so poor, and the fact that they're so poor, people have to do all of the healthcare and funerary practices at home.
Hold on.
They have to wash their loved one's body and bury it themselves.
Well, you're saying the white colonizers coming into black Africa and bringing diseases which can basically wipe them out.
Some of the diseases were imported, and some of them are homegrown. I mean, they called it the Fever Coast for a reason.
Because of all the transportation and commerce.
Well, it was just, I mean, the reason that it was, the reason that they didn't, there was so little, white penetration into that area was the white people died like flies. And even African Americans who'd been brought up in the United States and then sent back to Liberia, they also died like flies. You had to grow up in that region to develop the immunity to those diseases.
I see. So now, now the coronavirus, and one of the greatest breakthroughs, and also fueling a great deal of misconception and misinformation, is how the virus was made. Now, big thing that the anti-vaxxers are saying is that they're treating it, they think it's like the flu, where they inject a weakened strand of the flu. Is that what they're doing with the coronavirus? Is it a weakened strand of the virus?
The
Sorry, the vaccine. Is it a weakened strand of the virus?
No. I'm not sure how all of them are made, but the mRNA vaccines, which are the ones that are the most effective, that's the Moderna and the Pfizer.
Pfizer.
They have they contain messenger RNA. Now, when messenger RNA is part of how your cell makes proteins. So when you have the chromosomes in your cells are like cookbooks. They're like cookbooks in a library. They're inside the nucleus of the cell. So when it comes time to read one of those recipes and send the order back to the kitchen, mRNA with messenger RNA copies that recipe from the chromosome and then carries it out to the ribosome, which is like the kitchen. So it's like somebody copied a recipe onto an index card and took it out to the kitchen. So that's what the mRNA is. The mRNA is the recipe, and it gets into the ribosomes. The ribosomes then make that protein, and then those, in the case of a viral infection, the proteins would self-assemble into a new virus and so forth. But the way that these mRNA vaccines work is that they give you only the proteins that you need to recognize the infection, not enough to make a whole virus. So that's why you can't catch COVID-19 from the mRNA vaccine.
Okay, so this is a vaccine that they developed, they made themselves, or that they've gotten from other people who have had the virus?
The mRNA vaccine was made purely in the laboratory because somebody somewhere figured out the exact recipe for the proteins in the natural virus. It's called sequencing. So when you find a new virus and you figure out, you've got its genetic code, and then you run it through some fancy machines, and the answer comes out of, what is the exact recipe for the proteins in that. That's called gene sequencing. So once that recipe was known, you could email that recipe to somebody on the far side of the planet, and they can make a vaccine out of it.
So this is basically like a designer pocketbook knockoff. Oh, we lost you.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's not the real thing. Looks like it, but it's a fake virus. So
it's only enough to get the body to recognize what a natural, to build antibodies that would fight a natural infection.
So the body looks at this really low dose fake virus, and it gears up to fight.
Correct. So when the body is, your own cells are taking this mRNA, making the viral protein as if you had a viral infection. So it's kind of mimic a natural infection that way.
So this
But it doesn't have the harmful bits.
so this is such a low copy because the real coronavirus spreads so fast that it overwhelms the actual antibodies. This one is so low that the antibodies build up enough at a faster rate to defeat it.
Correct. It's always it's a race.
Oh, I see. Great. So here's a conspiracy. They're injecting nanoids into your system, causing the body to be magnetized and stick to cell towers.
I've had all my vaccinations and then some, and I have the least magnetic personality you've ever met.
Well, wait a minute. You're also supposed to be connected to the 5G, where where you're related and linked into bitcoins.
Oh, nobody's ever given me any Bitcoin. Oh, come on. Nobody's going to give me any invisible money. They don't even want to give me real money.
Hold on. So, also, you are getting the metal or the nanos that they are injecting in your body gives the government a way of identifying who you are, and you're taking on the mark of the beast. You're muted.
If the evil people wanted to track me, they would just track my damn self.
All right.
Who do they think we are?
So, Americans have overcome a great deal of diseases through vaccination, right? But what I find is that the vaccination approval and Americans getting it has to do a lot with the government or how they feel about the government at that time. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, his friend Napoleon actually vaccinated his soldiers against smallpox, which they stayed healthier up until they caught some other disease, which gave them a great deal of diarrhea. But they stayed healthier. In fact, Thomas Jefferson even vaccinated his slaves in terms of testing them.
Well, George Washington variolated. A vaccination wasn't around yet. Variolation uses live smallpox. Vaccination originally used cowpox, which is a much safer approach. But George Washington used actual live smallpox on every single man who came into the Continental Army. He was urged to do so by Benjamin Franklin and Benjamin Rush and John Morgan, who were medical men Benjamin Franklin was just a scientist, but the other two were medical men in Philadelphia. And the Benjamin Franklin had not variolated one of his children, who then died of smallpox years earlier. And he said it was, I was afraid to do it. And then he said, there's some danger in the procedure, but there's more danger in the disease. So, you'll never forgive yourself if your child dies of smallpox if you didn't vaccinate or variolate them. So please do it.
The emergence into vaccination basically defeated polio.
Polio is almost extinct. We've been really the polio is, I mean, I haven't checked lately, but some of the strains of it are gone. Now, this is something that's been a problem since the days of ancient Egypt, and it's now almost extinct, it's amazing. Guinea worm is also almost extinct. It was a dracunculiasis. It was a problem that was known in ancient times. I don't remember whether it was mentioned in the Bible or not offhand, but it was around then, and people realized that it was from contaminated water sources. So to defeat this, you just had to keep people who had this problem out of the water and filter their drinking water, and then it just went away.
vaccinations conquered measles, the MMR, and rubella.
Well, when measles is extremely easy to catch. Now,
Yeah.
when they're talking about the reproduction rate of a vaccine or of a viral disease, and the reproduction rate is how many new cases are spawned by each existing case. So if it's less than one, then you get this curve downward as the incidence of it declines. But if
Because
you
there are no hosts.
right, if it's more than one, it's an exponential growth curve
which
upward.
which is why it expands and grows quickly in heavy populated areas.
Correct, correct. Now the R naught, R with a subscript of 0, that's the basic reproduction rate. That's how many people would catch it from from one infected person in a setting where everybody is susceptible. Nobody's already immune. And the R naught for COVID was somewhere around 2. The R naught for measles is 18.
Mm, wow. Wow. So conquering the measles was a huge check in the box, feather in the cap for science. And in fact, I believe at that time it was marketed in terms of governmental approval was skyrocketing because of it. Not only that, the strong interest into science and its development was highly because of that. To the point where United States military, when I went in, I went through a series of 30 shots. Vaccinating upon vaccination upon vaccination upon. I felt like a Superman. Of course, after feeling bad for like 2 or 3 days, I was feeling great. So, I mean, we use it to keep our people who fight for our country safe. Yet, the people that we are keeping safe from aggression in terms of foreign are not taking the vaccine because of political opinion, cult worshiping and belief, followings.
Well, to get a handle on this problem, I think you have to understand a concept that I'm going to be talking about in my book, The Game of Politics, which I'm still writing. But I talked about this in a paper that I presented to the Bertrand Russell Society a few years ago. In any society that's large enough to have a division of labor, all of the people have different occupations, right? That's what division of labor means.
Mm-hmm.
But in any society that's large enough to have this division of labor, you're going to find that the occupations can fall into 4 basic categories. And this was understood in the late Bronze Age in India. I mean, this is like before the Bible was written. People understood this. And those 4 categories are, I mean, I could use the Sanskrit words, but they're confusing. So there's the ruler. The kshatriyas means ruler. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the person who has the power of violence. And they're the only people who have the power to authorize the use of violence. Then there is the wealthy people. They have the power of wealth. But they don't have the power of violence. Your boss is not allowed to whip you. Fire you, but he's not allowed to whip you. Then there are the teachers and preachers. This was called the Brahmin Varna.
The power of influence.
Yeah. And so these are people who are highly educated, and they are selfless. They are, they put them, they sacrifice them. They're willing to sacrifice themselves, for the cause of justice. And that's like Dr. Martin Luther King. So he's kind of an archetype of that. And then there's everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're having trouble understanding these concepts, this fourfold division of society, this was also the basis of the card suits in European playing cards. So you have a spade, which originally meant a blade. It was the sword. So who had the power of the sword was the ruler.
Right.
And I mean, the king, or the government can throw people in jail, but I can't just capture people and put them in my basement. If no matter what they've done. So
Yeah, there are certain words for that.
right, yeah, it would be a crime if I did it, right? Um,
Yes.
so so the person the people with the monopoly on legitimate use of force are the rulers. Um, then there's the wealthy. They have the power to hire and fire, but they don't have the power of wealth. Or I'm sorry, they don't have the power of violence.
Power
They don't know how
violence.
to use it. And although both the rulers and the business people should be educated people, they're not the teachers and preachers. These things should be separate, because you know rulers do things in order to maintain power, and and um, business people do things in order to make money. But they shouldn't be in charge of preaching what's right and preaching what's true and what's right. So on the other, so that we've got scientists and scholars and teachers and preachers and whatnot, and, people who are exhorting us, teaching us the truth and exhorting us to moral virtue. Those are that's the Brahmin role. Um, then there's everybody else. Okay? The Brahmins were the hearts, right, in the card suit. So you've got spades, diamonds, hearts, and then what's left is everybody else's clubs. Now, now the same fourfold division also, it's also the basis of the schools at Hogwarts in the Harry Potter books. So Harry Potter, who is, he's somebody who's defending the world. He's defending through through the use of force and violence, or he uses his magic for defending the people. That's the Gryffindor school. They're the people who are the protectors and defenders. That's Gryffindor. Then there are the wealthy people, the Slytherins, and and they're kind of slimy. And, from the Harry Potter books, it's like, well, why would you want to have these people around? Why would you want to have the business people around? And the answer is because the entire economy would fall to pieces if you didn't have people organizing production.
Right. So if you didn't have snakes, the rats would overrun your village.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I mean, if you didn't have, if you didn't have the Moderna company doing the practical research of bringing a product to market, if you didn't have these pharmaceutical companies working out how to make a saleable product, you wouldn't have the saleable product on sale. So, so they do play a role. And but then there's the Brahmins. They're the ones who can teach you moral virtue, teach you truth, and teach you moral virtue, but they generally suck as administrators.
Okay. So
And then there's everybody else. Everybody else, they just want to have happy lives, bring up their kids, barbecue with the neighbors on the weekends. So there are
all not being in a ruling class or a class of power, nor do they want to dedicate their life to humanity. Yet they just want to exist and pick and choose the direction that they want to go, but not go as far and extreme as the others. But
right.
okay, so now we're looking at the ruling class or the leaders who want to stay in power are basically our politicians. We look at the ruler class, but the problem that we have is that our politicians in staying in power is based upon the president who has the power of violence. Then we also, if I'm getting this straight, we also have the power of money, who can and have brought politicians.
The idea behind these four different categories is that they should be separate. You shouldn't have the preachers run the government, because then there's nobody to criticize their behavior.
Right. So
the business people run the government because we'd all be their slaves.
Correct.
And you can't just have the ordinary people run the government because their strength is the strength of number.
They lack the skills to lead.
Yeah, but they don't have the coordination, and they don't have the vision. So the way Gandhi conceived of this, because he understood this fourfold division. Remember, he was a Hindu.
Right.
So he studied this. He said the Bhagavad Gita was his political dictionary. And then he came up with this system that works in any religion, um, of the system of nonviolence, because the way it works is you have the um, you have the wise people preach to everybody, but but they preach not just to the ruling class, and not just to the people who run the government, and not just to the people who run industry, but they preach to the ordinary people as well, and they teach the ordinary people how to use their power of number in order to in order to promote justice within society.
So So, so what we have is the ruling class, the leaders who are very influential, telling now the lower class that the virus is fake, and also or the vaccine doesn't help, and they won't die from the virus. But also, you have the other class of people who are quote unquote supposed to be influential, who are also spreading a variation of this message by saying that you're going to become a magnetized, and they're going to rob all of your money out of Bitcoin by these nanos injection, that they're injecting you with the virus, which will kill you, and that you don't qualify as one of the quote unquote class of people who the virus was designed to kill.
Well, what you have there is a lot of ignorant people trying to be Brahmins when they're not.
Everybody wants to be a leader, but they don't have the mental capabilities.
Right. These people, there are a lot of people, they want to be admired as a source of as the well of information, and the arbiter of moral virtue. But they're not nice people. They lie like rugs, and they don't know what they're talking about. And a lot of them have some sort of business angle that they're trying to pursue.
Henceforth, the group of people who are saying that you don't need to get your children vaccinated with the normal vaccinations that every child has gone through since what, the 60s, where they started that mass school government issue of if you're going to school you have to have your shots.
Well, the requirement to get people vaccinated against smallpox went way back further than that.
Yeah. But
it's as the measles vaccine came out in the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, the measles shot, in which they were saying no, you don't need to get your kids shots. In fact, I talked to a chiropractor who told me that my child didn't need to get shots. All she had to do was to come into his office and get bi-weekly adjustments.
The chiropractic school, that by school I mean the concept of chiropractic. There's more than one institution that teaches chiropractic. But the guy who created chiropractic came up with an idea. His theory was obsolete when it was invented.
But yet everybody swears by it. Or a lot of people swear by it.
Well, it's more complicated than that. I mean, most of the stuff that was being taught in regular medical schools at the time was nonsense. We really didn't get on a firm footing of good medical education until after the Flexner Report came out in 1910. And Abraham Flexner was a very highly educated person, and they'd sent him around. The Carnegie Foundation sent him around to evaluate all of the colleges and universities in North America, so he could advise the wealthy people which ones were worth giving money to. So again, this was the Varna system working as it was supposed to. You got a Brahmin, smart person, send them around to evaluate the other Brahmins so that they could tell the business people, whose part of their job is to be philanthropists, to share that wealth that they've collected. So you had rich people listening to smart people and doing things that were in that case doing things that were beneficial. That doesn't always happen, but then after that was a success, so they said, well, why don't we evaluate the medical schools? And he found that most of the medical schools in the United States and Canada were terrible. He said the only one that was any good was Johns Hopkins. And he set up proposed a European-based model for medical education that we follow to this day. that's why medical education has improved since the early 20th century.
And lives have been saved. Okay, but okay, now we're fussing and fighting over the new strand, the Delta strand, that is ravaging or starting to really take on. I mean, we are maybe 2, 3 weeks away from either lockdown or strong mask mandate in every state. Yet, right now, in other countries, they're fighting the Delta plus.
Coronaviruses have their genetic information, their recipes, written in RNA, not DNA.
Mm-hmm.
All living things.
Hold on.
All living things.
Quick breakdown: the difference for those between RNA and DNA.
RNA is slightly different chemically. It has a different sugar in it.
Ribonucleic acid versus.
Right. It's got a ribonucleic acid instead of deoxyribonucleic acid.
Yeah.
So it's slightly different chemically. And the DNA is much more stable chemically. So it's no accident that all living things have DNA as their repository of genetic information.
The
All of
found.
their genes are written in DNA. They use RNA for carrying short-term messages, but they use DNA for long-term storage. Now, viruses are not living things. Again, they're recipes that have been written out by a living cell and spread out, cast out, so that they can be, picked up by other cells and then multiplied and so forth. But the viruses themselves are not alive. They don't have a metabolism. They don't burn energy. They don't consume fuel or sunlight in order to power anything. They don't do work in a physical sense. The problem with as I said before, the smallpox virus has its genes in the form of a double strand of DNA, so it's pretty stable. The influenza vaccine and the coronavirus vaccine, virus, the influenza and coronaviruses are single strand of RNA, which means that they're not, it's less stable, so it's more prone to mutation. Also, the fact that there's only one strand means that there's no backup of information. So a double-stranded DNA a virus can use the cell's own DNA proofreading enzymes to fix minor mutations. So that's why they tend to be pretty genetically stable. RNA viruses can mutate really fast. And some of them remain stable simply because they found a trick that works, and any deviation from that is fatal to them. So that's called conservation, when any mutation would be weeded out by natural selection.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to expect that a single-strand RNA virus is going to mutate really fast.
So the new Delta Plus is mutating faster than the Delta, which is mutating faster than the European, which is mutating faster than the original strand of COVID.
Well, I don't know. It's mutating faster. It's spreading faster.
Spreading faster. Okay.
Right. And I think the reason for this is because it's a little bit better at avoiding the human immune system.
Mm-hmm.
When you make antibodies, your antibodies are Y-shaped proteins that are made by B cells. And B cells are blood cells that come from your bone marrow. And the Y-shaped antibody has some sort of like lock and key relationship with something. So if you're allergic to peanuts, then there's if you're allergic to something, if you're allergic to strawberries, then there's something on strawberries that you're making IgE class of antibodies that interact with some protein from the strawberries. And when that key fits in that lock, then all sorts of, hay fever type stuff results. But when the best kind of antibodies to have are what are called neutralizing antibodies. That is an antibody that sticks to the business end of the virus. So it jams the virus so that it can't get into a cell and reproduce. And the Delta variant is better at getting, we're not good at making neutralizing antibodies against it.
Is there any way in terms of natural food that we can increase our neutral
Nope.
and
I would be if no, no, not
well,
really.
it'd be a number one seller right now?
If there were, I'd be selling it, I suppose. Except I'm terrible at selling things.
But I'm pretty good. So we may, because we're running out of time, we're going to have you visit again so that we can follow up on this. Big, what would you like to say for those who are vaccine hesitant? There is no reason we shouldn't be 80% vaccinated.
I'm tired of going to funerals. Please get your vaccination.
Mm. Okay, Lori, how can people find your book?
It's on Amazon.com.
Yeah, your books actually. And when are those other books? Because they sound really interesting. When are you going to have those done?
Oh, okay. Well, my first book was Not Trivial, which explained it's a little bit of Black history wrapped up in a cover with a pretty white lady on the front.
Yeah, that's how you sell Black history. Yeah,
Oh yeah. I celebrate Black History Month all year long.
yeah, yeah. You want to sell a Black history book? Put a pretty white woman on the cover. Yeah.
Well, but then later on, my book Don't Feed the Narcissist has two half naked pretty white people on the cover.
Mm.
The white lady has one titty sticking out.
Ooh, that ought to go over well. Okay. I can see that being a number one on every religious community bookshelf. Yeah.
She's on the back. She's on the back. The painting wraps around. So you can't see the white lady's titty till you pick up the book and turn it over.
I'm glad you said the T word, because if I said it, I would have gotten 200,000 emails. Okay, so well, listen, Lori, thank you for being on our show. I really enjoy you every time you come on.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Now, for those of you right now who are listening at the power of my voice, we've got a lot to overcome, a lot to accomplish, and we need to build back better. It doesn't make sense now to see the news of people who are dying of the Delta strand, especially people of color. Blacks are dying and contracting this disease at a disproportionate number compared to our white counterparts. Yet, with everything that's going on, you are going to let some slight history stop you from saving your lives and the lives of your children. Listen, if you're listening to all of these anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists, keep this in mind. With the amount of lawyers in our country right now, and all these crimes that they are consisting that the medical industry is doing, wouldn't there be massive lawsuits going on? I mean, we would be making billions, and black people would be at the top of that because we would be the subject of it. Yet, we're not using common sense. We are letting them exploit our lack of education and research to kill us, to destroy us, and our children. It's about time that we put down the superstitions and embrace the actual facts. You don't have to listen to me. You don't have to listen to Lori Thomas. But listen to some people that you can trust. Your doctors, friends and family that are in the medical community. And yes, there are some people in the medical community right now that are vaccine hesitant. However, if you look at it, right now, when the vaccine started, and we were doing up to 3 million a day, we looked at the deaths and infection rate go down, which shut every anti-vaxxer up. Now they're using the new term and saying, well, it's not fully FDA approved. Really? It works. We have to now use common sense and stop listening to ignorant people who want to exploit you for their own ability to shine in the light. Because like other cult leaders, they're leading you to your death.